So each chapter is focused on a different um, literary text, and what I really like about the book is that you talk through your own experiences of how you start to teach it, and perhaps then how well or how not well that goes, depending on the text, and then how your students often kind of it really is a dynamic situation where the students are bringing so much to the teaching experience. So, I mean, could you just talk a little bit more about one text, maybe one example, and how that transition happened between going into a classroom with a text and then what happened within the classroom and how your students engaged with the text?
Well, maybe I'll give you one example of one that went well and one that went badly.
Okay.
I think that might be a kind of interesting contrast. So the one that went badly, in a sense, I think I had too definite a sense of what I wanted the students to do with the text. So at the time that I was there, there was a very prominent kind of hunger strike going on from some Palestinian prisoners who were being held in Israeli jails. And I thought, oh, we should read something relevant to this because the students are talking about it. So I gave them Kafka's The Hunger Artist to read and think about. And in the discussion we had in class, everyone really clammed up. And I think it was an example where I, as a teacher, I was really like, oh, this is going to be relevant. This is going to be relevant. And actually people kind of backed off it a bit. So that's the example that didn't work so well. But the one that kind of endlessly surprised me was Shakespeare. And I taught 3 different Shakespeare plays when I was there. All of them, I thought, maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe the language will be too difficult and so on. And all of them in different ways worked in really interesting ways that I hadn't expected. And just to give one example of that, with Romeo and Juliet, one thing I found was I kind of went into this thinking, I know Romeo and Juliet, everybody knows the plot of Romeo and Juliet. We'll kind of get through this, but this isn't necessarily going to change my view of the play. And actually, it radically changed my view of the play. And if I can give a kind of a simple version of that, I've kind of always thought of Romeo and Juliet as this play that's about love. It's about the lovers. And in order to make the plot work, there's this other stuff going on in the background. There's this kind of violent context they're in and these things that interrupt them. But that's really just to make the plot go. And what it felt like when I was reading the play with the students at Al-Quds was that I had it the wrong way round. And that actually this thing I thought was in the background about the violent context, maybe that's the main thing in Romeo and Juliet. Maybe what we're really talking about is a society where young people's lives are disrupted, are constantly in crisis in all sorts of ways. And in a way, maybe it's the love story in the foreground that's just there to make the plot go. Maybe it's the other way around. And there were all sorts of surprises for me in reading texts with my students in the West Bank like that.
Great. That's really, really interesting. I mean, I think the current COVID crisis that we're going through at the moment, which is obviously a very different situation, has definitely made me think of how much the literature we read that we think is all quite nice or quite benign, like the love story in Romeo and Juliet, or even a story like Jane Eyre or Bleak House, or kind of novels that actually have infection and the danger of infection at their very core and at their heart. Because I suppose our lives are often quite easy in Britain, we maybe focus on the things in the novel and think, well, Jane Eyre is about a love story, was actually it's about, abusive childhood. I mean, it's quite a horrible story in lots of ways. So it does open our eyes to things that we often aren't aware of.
Absolutely. And I remember reading someone, I can't remember where this was, saying that they suddenly understand that way in which old correspondence always begins by updating the person you're writing to on everyone in the family's health. And that actually that used to seem like a sort of strange etiquette that we didn't have anymore. But actually, it's a response to living in with a much more fragile sense of everybody's health. That actually you would begin by saying, here's the list of how everyone I know is doing. How is everyone doing? And that seems to us suddenly, very understandable in a different way, I think.